All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining today. Another Balerion Space Ventures podcast. It's May 27th, and today I'm joined with Jason Andrews, the co-founder and CEO of Orbite Space, the astronaut training company. Really excited to talk about this one today. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you, Aidan. It's great. Fantastic. What you guys do is great for the industry.
Well, to get things kicked off, maybe you could give us a high-level pitch of what you guys do. Explain it to someone who maybe isn't familiar with the space industry, um, because I'm sure you do quite a bit. And I'm wondering what your go-to elevator pitch is for this company.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's one line as we send people to space. If you Today, if you want to travel to space, you really have three options. You can either go apply to be a government astronaut with NASA, the European Space Agency, or your national space agency. You can go and purchase an eight-figure ticket from an existing provider. Those fall into SpaceX, Axiom, Vast, Voyager, or even the likes of Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, or you come to Orbite. And Orbite is unique in that you don't need a ticket to space or become a government astronaut. We prepare you, and we like to say prepare you mentally, physically, and spiritually for your spaceflight journey. And maybe just to give you background, I'm a serial space entrepreneur. I started my first company in 1999 at the age of 27, and I've been in this business a little while. My first company was a satellite company. It exists today as Leo Stella. My second company was a space transportation company called Spaceflight, which I founded in 2008 to really get access for small satellites. Back then, it was one rocket to one satellite before what we have today. And what spaceflight did is buy excess capacity on existing launch vehicles, and then we integrate these satellites in the nooks and crannies. And we had so much demand that in 2015 we purchased a Falcon 9, and it ultimately flew in 2018. It was called SSOA, launched 63 satellites, the world's largest rideshare at the time. That's pretty commonplace today, a decade later, but back then that was bleeding edge. And I told Gwen Shotwell at SpaceX at the time, we're launching satellites. In the future, when you fly people, we want to fly people. Uh, and so I ended up going and started another company called Black Sky, which is public on the New York Stock Exchange, and took a break. And in 2020, and that's on the eve of Dragon flying, Blue Origin flying, Virgin Galactic flying. I met my business partner and we took a step back and we're like, well, where's the future? We just had the small satellite revolution. What's next? And that's the human spaceflight revolution. And whereas NASA trains government employees to go to space, there's really no one to train everybody else. And we believe wholeheartedly in Elon's vision of making the species multiplanetary, and I guess you could say Jeff Bezos' vision of millions of people living and working in space. And if that's going to be true, there needs to be a company that prepares people for this off-world existence. And so that's why we created Orbite.
Awesome. So I want to go to space. Walk me through the step-by-steps of how you guys can make that happen for me. What do I have to do if I'm just sitting here and decide in my head, I want to go to space? What does that process look like to
Right.
the point where I'm in space?
So what we say is experience, train, fly. Ironically, we're developing the industry. There's not many human spaceflight companies. There's a lot of satellite companies and defense tech companies, and we're really one of the pioneers building that pipeline. And so for you, who's like, hey, I'm in, I want to go, we have a series of astronaut training programs. We start with astronaut orientation, which Aiden, you're pretty educated on the industry, so this is not necessarily for you, but most people don't know the difference between suborbital spaceflight and orbital spaceflight. Or even within suborbital spaceflight, what is the difference between a Blue Origin flight and a Virgin Galactic flight? Or even orbital, what is the difference between Starliner, Dragon, and Starship? And so we come in and educate them and then also expose them to, okay, what does it feel like to be in zero gravity? What does it feel like to experience the launch and reentry loads, and put them in a high G experience so that they walk away. We like to say go from zero to hero in your space IQ. So they're educated enough to say, oh, I'd actually like to do suborbital and I want blue over Virgin Galactic or vice versa, Virgin Galactic over blue. Or I would like to go off and, maybe focus on Starship when it comes, hopefully here in the near future. And then from there, you go on to your mission specific training. So if you want to do suborbital training or suborbital mission, we have a suborbital training program. And really, what we do is that basic training. Ultimately, that final mission specific training is done by the provider. So if you go again on a Virgin Galactic flight, Virgin will do the final safety briefing and show you how their vehicle works. Or if you go on Dragon, they'll do that to show how Dragon works. But as far as all of that training for suborbital, orbital, and mission specialization, that's where we fit in. We're in this interesting wild west of the industry just formulating, where a lot of the astronauts that fly on Dragon are NASA astronauts. They have years of training and preparation before they're handed off to SpaceX for that mission specific training. The challenge on some of these missions, like FRAM or Inspiration 4, is that there was a cadre of people there who've never flown to space before and have never done any astronaut training. So we do a lot of that basic training really to build a pipeline for the industry. So that's what we do from astronaut training. And then when you're ready, we help arrange your flight to space. When I started space flight, initially about rideshare, but what SpaceX ultimately wanted to do was sell whole flights. And I think that's what we see. The providers are moving to a point where, hey, if you can bring full cohorts or full crews for these future missions, they get very interested and excited. So that's what we're currently doing and waiting for the industry to expand. But in the meantime, we make our money here on Earth, training people for space. At the same time, you ask, what is your elevator pitch? The answer is we send people to space. We'll send you to space. And so we spend a lot of time developing this market, spend time with ultra high net worth individuals. Think private aviation, think private yachting, think Formula One. And we sit with a lot of people who can afford 50, 60, $70 million rides to space. But the problem is space in 20 human space flight, let's be very clear. Human space flight in 2025, let's call it, is the same as aviation in 1925, a century ago. Whereas in the 1920s, aviation was a joyride. It wasn't a mode of transportation. But in the 1930s, it was very much a mode of transportation. So most of the general population, when we get outside of our bubble here in the space industry, don't even know space is a thing, don't even know they can go to space. And so we'll sit on that yacht right there, race, trackside at Monaco, and talk to someone and say, "Hey, do you want to go to space?" And they get to a point and go, "Wait a minute, that's not something I do." But we flip it around and say, well, do you want to do something your friends haven't done before? And the answer is always yes. So we also, to develop this pipeline, created what we call the funnel development, what we call space experiences, where we take elements of our astronaut training, we package it into something that looks like a luxury five-star vacation. And it's something that they're ready to buy because they want to do the next thing. They've already done everything. They want to do the next thing space. And so we engage them and allow them to experience what this industry is offering and where it's going, and actually to do elements of the astronaut training. And they come away going, wow, that was really cool. I want to do more. And some of them then go on to then turn into being potential astronaut training candidates and ultimately potential spaceflight participants.
Yeah, taking part in this can really take you far. I mean, look at who's running NASA right now. Jared Isaacman. He's a big fan of space and was, I think, the first civilian to do a spacewalk. And that just snowballed into he's the right person to run the United States space program.
Oh, we're
So,
we're SpaceX defines him as a unicorn. They would love to have many Jared Isaacmans out there, citizen astronauts, pioneers who come and purchase full missions and, almost develop their own space program. And now he's running the space program. So I couldn't agree more that he's the ideal candidate to do that.
okay, so let's say I pay my bill and I'm at astronaut camp, space camps. What's the training look like? Walk me through the whole experience on the day-to-day level.
Sure, I can go through our three different programs. So, for astronaut orientation, again, first of all, these programs, you don't need to be a billionaire to do them, but they are cost tens of thousands of dollars. So it's not cheap. But at the same time, our clients, The hardest part is NASA takes 2 years to prepare someone to go to space. And we need to develop a Cliff Notes version of that, meaning we have to condense that down into something that's going to work in people's daily lives and schedules. And most of our clients are, entrepreneurs, executives. They have a week is very precious to them. So we have to condense this into a short period of time. So for us, our astronaut orientation program is 3 days, 4 nights. The first day, you arrive, there's multiple hours of education. And again, this is the zero to hero education about what happens to your body in space. What is an orbit? What is the difference between suborbital and orbital? What are the different mission profile options? And you spend the morning learning about just that basic knowledge that the vast majority of everybody doesn't have. Then that afternoon, we actually go and simulate those different missions. So we've developed in virtual reality a hangar where you could put all the vehicles and get a sense of size and scale and how they relate to everybody. So you can appreciate that a Dragon capsule is very small compared to a Starship. We have the two suborbital providers currently. So you get to see and touch and feel what those vehicles look like. And then we simulate elements of those missions just to give a sense of, okay, what is it like to go up and down on a Blue Origin or do a mission profile on Virgin Galactic? These are simulations, they're representations. And then what is it like to be in low Earth orbit on a Dragon spacecraft with your head poking out of the cupola that sits on the front like they did in Inspiration 4? What is it like to be on a Starship going around the backside of the moon? And it's very awe-inspiring. We all in the industry talk about the overview effect. And one of the very interesting things we experienced was that people in virtual reality were actually a few of them were getting the overview effect, which was not anticipated at all. So that's day one. It's very packed full of adventure, especially for people not exposed to the industry. Day two, we go on a zero G flight. At the moment, we're operating this program out of Europe because that's the only operating commercial zero G aircraft at the moment. We're very hopeful that we have that capability back in the United States very soon. So you spend a day simulating what it's like to be in zero gravity. If you've done a zero G flight, at least in Europe, they start by simulating Mars gravity at 1/3, then the moon gravity at 1/6, and then you get 15 parabolas in zero gravity. Then that is an even more action-packed day. And then finally, on the last day, we put you in a high G aircraft, acrobatic aircraft, to simulate launch and reentry loads, where if you're willing, we work up to 6 Gs. We don't start there, and clients can opt out at any time. But a lot of them actually go all the way to 6 Gs. And then interspersed in there is a lot of training about mental training about stress management. Going in a zero G aircraft or a high G aircraft is usually a novel experience for everybody, and it can be slightly intimidating. So, how do you manage those stresses? But these are all the things that you would have to do to prepare for space. So, that's our astronaut orientation program. We've operated out of the United States, but currently, and Europe, but currently it's only operating in Europe. And then from there, you go into suborbital, which is more specific education, zero G training, and high G training about the mission specific profile. I think it's public knowledge that Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin do elements of training for their missions, but it does not include zero G flight and high G flight. Do you need to do our training before you go on those missions? No. At the same time, given the price point of these missions, let's just say $1 million in a round number, and it's in short, you get 3 to 5 minutes in zero G, depending on the provider. The point is, you come and do our training, which is tens of thousands of dollars, not even hundreds of thousands of dollars. You do our training so that you maximize your return on that investment and you get maximum enjoyment from that flight. So that hey, I can look out this window at this time, or what am I going to do when I get to zero G? Am I just going to randomly throw Skittles around the capsule, or do I want to look at something or do something very specific? And then when we go on to orbital training, that is much more involved. Currently, we're at a 6-week program and it is mission specific. And that's where you would break it into it's like NASA boot camp in a super condensed fashion. And the way we structure that, it's not 6 weeks back to back, it's 6 individual classes. that you have to go and attend that are a week long each. And think of this as like college level curriculums where you have your 100 level courses, your 200 level courses, your 300 level courses. It gets more involved and more in depth. And so all this information I'm telling you is actually on our website, orbitespace.com. And so if anyone's interested, go there or feel free to reach out to us through the website, and we'd love to talk to you about our training programs.
And when someone goes through training programs and they wanna ride up on a rocket, they wanna get to space afterwards, are you assisting with that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in constant dialogue with all the providers out there, and it's really about choose your own adventure. What adventure do you want to go on? Where Orbit sits is, uniquely we provide training for every provider and um, mission consultation services or mission management services for every provider. Maybe backing up, when we started this company in 2019, it was because of Starship. What we saw was Starship is where we're going to go from dozens of people flying to space. And when I say space, I'm going to say orbit for this next part of the conversation. I don't want to talk about the suborbital, which we're super supportive, but dozens of people per year circling the planet to when Starship starts flying those first commercial passengers, it will be, hundreds per year. But very soon after, it can easily be thousands per year. And I know for most of us sitting here, that sounds, even in the industry, like science fiction. But if you look at what SpaceX is doing from an infrastructure standpoint, if you look at what Elon wants to achieve, which is more than 10,000 flights per year to launch data centers to space and communication satellites and ultimately support human presence on the moon and Mars. It's very feasible to think of, a Starship launching once a week. Let's start with once a week. It carries maybe 20 passengers. It circles the planet for 3 to 5 days and it comes back. Call it a private yacht in low Earth orbit. If we go at 20 people once a week, that's 1,000 people. And they're designing it so they're talking about launches per hour. So it can easily be more than that. And what that's going to do is drive down the cost. The initial cost will be tens of millions of dollars, but it's not unreasonable to think that as the flight rate increases, the potential cost or price per ticket can get to single digit millions and even sub single digit millions for a trip to low Earth orbit and back. And when that happens, that's when the economy moves into space, where you have low Earth orbit industries and destinations, as well as people potentially leaving beyond low Earth orbit to the moon and then eventually to Mars. So what we do is we help put those cohorts together, train them and operate them. We think the paradigm we think space as a transportation medium is going to evolve like any other transportation medium. There's those early days where it's done by pioneers, and the operators themselves, like the Wright brothers had passengers early on, but at some point they said, we just want to build airplanes. We just want to do infrastructure. And today in aviation, you have companies like Boeing and Airbus that build and deploy the infrastructure, and you have airlines that provide that experience and that service layer on top of it. We believe space within the next 5 to 10 years is going to be in the exact same place where there's infrastructure providers and then there's going to be service providers. If you look at Blue Origin and SpaceX, they each have at least 10,000 employees, if not more. And how many of them are, dedicated to providing a service? It's very low. So it naturally, especially when you get to volumes, it will be outsourced to service providers like Orbit or other companies that do what we do.
How often are there manned missions to orbit that aren't astronauts but private individuals who just want to go to space? What's that cadence look like, and what do you think it's going to be looking like in the future?
Well, right now it's very low. We have the main orbital missions are to the International Space Station and hopefully soon VAST, their destination. NASA's awarded 3 private astronaut missions, one to Axiom, one to VAST, and one to Starlab or Voyager. That's after Axiom has done, what, 3 or 4 missions already? So it's not been large volume. And if you look at the majority of the people who are going on those missions, they are government astronauts. The market for private astronauts at $65 to $80 million a ticket is very low. That's not that there aren't people that can afford it. I think there's two problems. One is how do you justify it? And then also people don't know about it. We have been working with everybody in the market development process. We hold a series of events. In fact, next week I'll be back in Monaco at F1 holding another Orbite event, which we've done in partnership with some of those people I've just listed previously in the past, where we're about working with the industry to do market development. And I think at those initial price points, it is difficult. However, the SpaceX IPO is shining a bright light on the space industry, and most people are like, what is this thing that's going on? World's largest IPO? What is happening? And that will also turn their focus to the fact that humans can go to space. As you know, SpaceX just announced at the last webcast of Starship V3 Flight 1 that they have the gentleman who did the Fram mission is not only on the next mission around the moon, but is one of the first passengers on a mission around Mars. So these stories will kind of shine the light on the fact that space is accessible to everybody. But we have a price problem and we have an experience problem. And going back to the industry, when we first sat down in 2019 with SpaceX, they were like, "Hey, do you want to buy a Dragon?" And we were like, "No, we want to buy a Starship." And they go, why? And I race sailboats across oceans, small sailboats across oceans. And let's just say you get to know your crew members probably better than you wanted to. And that's because when you're in a tight, confined space, it gets it's fine for the first half day, and then it gets uncomfortable because you're all the body functions and everything that's going on top of you. So it's like imagine putting four billionaires in a minivan and then locking them up for 4 days. It's not going to be fun after the first day or two. And unfortunately, that is what space experience is about. Like, what long duration space mission have you read about where the toilet didn't break? Um, Whereas Starship, it's a totally different experience. It's going to be uh, more than 10 passengers. There will be crew members on board taking care of you. It will be more like an Emirates first class experience than a camping adventure in a minivan. So it's going to be a very different experience and it's going to be a very different price point. And so that is really what's required to unlock this industry. Orbit, from our standpoint, we make the majority of our revenues today on Earth in our experience training programs and building the pipeline of clients for the fly element when it really starts to scale. But to answer your question, there's not many people flying to space. Most of them are government astronauts today, and we hope that changes very soon.
So going to Monaco next week, and you're talking with high net worth individuals. Does that look like you just, getting a ticket there and, work in the room at a cocktail party, or are people inviting you out there? Or is there certain individuals that you're targeting and you're trying to meet with while there?
I think it's all of the above. I guess being specific, we are supporting a private event of high net worth individuals where we are educating them about space. We're doing some of our VR simulation. We're bringing a space food experience. At the same time, we're hosting an event with a partner group of high net worth individuals that are there because they love excitement, race cars. They all have racing licenses. These are risk takers. They're our client profile. And then we're also attending other events where we're really maybe networking is the right word, or just getting the word out that space is a thing. Like I said, we in the past we've been on these yachts trackside where there'll be 50 to 100 people that could write a 50 to 100 million dollar check to go to space, and they just don't know they can go. And so it's just, hey, I'm Jason. I send people to space. I educate them, and you plant a seed, and then ultimately, you invite them to our space experiences or astronaut trainings to learn more. And it's a multi-step process. Like there's a few people wake up in the morning and says, I want to climb Mount Everest. And there's other people says, maybe I want to get into mountain climbing. You have to kind of work through it and go on bigger adventures before you're ultimately ready to go to Everest.
Wow. If you want to bring someone to get those people all excited about space and why it's such
You're
a good
volunteering?
investment,
Yeah, that sounds great.
it sounds like a really um, fun way that you get the word out there of going to where people who want to buy this excitement will be and getting them excited. And I feel like there's a network effect there where, those inner circles start talking and pretty soon everyone starts to know, well, I think there is a way to go to space. We met this guy, or my friend knows Jason. And then it becomes a race of, okay, who's actually going to pull the trigger and go first? Have you sort of found that network effect happening where there's people who are desperately trying to get to space really fast, or have we not hit that point yet?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. I think for the vast majority of the target clientele, they don't even know space is something they can go do. And so it's about getting the word out. For those early adopters, those people that have already purchased tickets on Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin or flown on those vehicles, they're looking for what's next. And for many of them, Dragon doesn't make sense, but Starship does. And we're all just waiting for Starship to become operational. When we started in investing early, being early is the same thing as being wrong. And when we started in 2019, we thought Starship was going to fly in 2022, and here we are. But I think we can all agree that it's imminent, and there's more momentum behind it than ever before. And we're still here building this and being a first mover. So, our real focus from a company is that pipeline development. Our real focus is generating revenue today through our space experiences and our astronaut training preparation programs, waiting for the fly element to take off so that we can be those first movers to book those initial clients on those missions. Our tech is not infrastructure. We're not building space stations or rockets or what's required to support this industry. Our tech is providing that experience to the client and around what it takes to make living and working in space enjoyable. The human body, evolved here on this planet, not off this planet. And if you actually look at what NASA does, historically, they have sponsored and built the infrastructure because they had to, because there was no market. But they've worked on outsourcing that to the private industry. What NASA still does is focus on the science of people living and working in space. And that's, what's exciting and intimidating to us is the fact that within 5 years, there could be 1,000 people a year flying to space. But that's not NASA leading that. Who is going to take over understanding how the human physiology works in space, preparing the food for the people going to space, designing the clothing, and building the hospitality infrastructure and the hygiene infrastructure? We've talked about the space toilet. It is not glamorous, but is absolutely critical to humans' existence in low Earth orbit and beyond. We gotta solve that problem. Those are the technologies. That's the deep tech that we're focused on. The deep tech is that critical infrastructure, everything you've done today since you got up, how do we do that in space? At the same time, our other focus area is on health and safety. How do we prepare the human body to go to space? What is that IP? How do we build it into our training programs? How do we build it into our astronaut training campus? We're operating our business today in third-party facilities. At the same time, we've been working long-term to build a dedicated spaceflight gateway, a human preparation research and development center. You see an image of it behind me here on this podcast. It is a dedicated, focused area where people will go to train and prepare for space. We're putting it at Cape Canaveral. Ultimately, it's a place they're going to quarantine before they and spend those last few weeks with their family before they travel to space. But we're talking about people going to the moon and on to Mars. In the near future, some of these people may not come back to Earth. So it is that last place you will stay on Earth before you depart for your off-world adventure.
Wow. And you mentioned earlier how, some people just don't even know this exists or this opportunity is available yet. Have you thought about marketing this with maybe a very popular influencer or someone that a lot of people pay attention to, someone like Mr. Beast or Jake Paul, Logan Paul, or Joe Rogan or something? Is that part of the strategy of how you can get this out there? Because I'm sure there's some people who depend a lot on their own personal brand who want to do something unique and different to get exposure, and it would work for both of y'all.
Yeah, yes to all of the above. Sadly, we don't attend space conferences because our clients aren't there. We go to F1 and yacht shows and Art Basel. Our clients tend to be into motorsports, yachting, private aviation, philanthropy, and art. So we go to those venues and get the word out. At the same time, we started last year or earlier this year, a broader digital marketing campaign. Maybe someone's seen an ad for Orbite, just to get the word out about what we're doing. But as far, that's more the B2C focus. But then we do have a series of B2B and B2C partnerships where we're working with groups that have already curated our clientele. That's part of what we're doing in Monaco and other events we're doing with partners throughout the year is supporting them and getting the word out to their networks. And then to your point about social media influencers, yeah, absolutely. I think up to now, most people don't know what space is. And again, the SpaceX IPO is shining a spotlight on this industry. And so now's the opportunity to start having those conversations. I think Artemis 2 was a huge milestone for human spaceflight. I think Starship version 3 is a huge milestone. I think it will just keep accelerating throughout this year and throughout the rest of this decade.
Absolutely. Um, Tell us about the zero gravity flight. Maybe you could explain it for people who aren't familiar. I've always been so interested in these.
Sure. So there's very few ways on this planet to simulate the weightlessness of space. And maybe the science behind it is when you go to orbit, you're still falling. Like if you went in and jumped out of an airplane, you're still falling. At the same time, you're going horizontally fast enough that you never actually will impact Earth. So you just keep falling and falling, and that's how you get the zero gravity experience when in orbit. And that's why you see rockets get up out of the atmosphere and accelerate because they need to get to 10 kilometers per second to stay in orbit around the planet without falling back. So the only way to simulate it on Earth is that you get into an aircraft and you do a pull-up maneuver and then you push over the top. And as you go over the top, the pilots are very good at positioning the aircraft so there's no positive gravity up or positive gravity down. So it simulates weightlessness. But you can imagine you can only go so long in zero G before you're pointing straight down at the planet and you have to pull up and do it again. And so they're called parabolas. And so there's been several aircraft specifically modified to support this. They're transport aircraft. There's Zero Gravity Corporation in the United States that uses a 727. There is Novaspace in Europe, which uses an A310 currently. And then there's a Russian company that uses an Ilyushin that operates out of the Middle East currently, but then given the current conflict, they're not operating. So and unfortunately, Zero Gravity Corporation's aircraft is down here in the United States and will hopefully come back at some point in the next year or two. But Novaspace operates an A310 out of Bordeaux. Our base of operations in Europe is out of Bordeaux. We have a European subsidiary. And so we work in partnership with them to simulate, use their service to provide the zero gravity training. And our training, you know, like anything, it usually starts small and gets large. And so the first set of training with astronaut orientation is more about just experiencing weightlessness and the joys of weightlessness. But when you get into the actual training piece, you still use the zero G aircraft, but it's mission specific. So you practice getting out of your seat, getting back into your seat. You only have about 20 seconds of weightlessness, so you can go through some maneuvers and some exercises so that you're more prepared for when the mission happens.
So I see multiple opportunities with this when you're training these people in, the same way that NASA does it. What the government is, figuring out is that, hey, private companies can do things a lot faster and cheaper than us. They're finding that out quite a bit in the space industry and aerospace and defense. But on the human side of things, the astronauts, they're still going through these long NASA programs, but soon enough, there's going to be lots and lots of people. So trying to scale up the NASA training program might be kind of hard, and they might be looking for, someone like yourself, a private company to do it for better, faster, and cheaper. So I'm wondering if this expands your market out beyond the high net worth individual and into government agencies wanting to train their men, or maybe even private contractors who are maybe space military contractors who are trained through your program. Is that something you've explored?
Yeah, so operate across all three business segments, the B2C consumer, B2B business, and B2G government. As far as what NASA does, they're the gold standard, and we're not trying to replace what NASA does. And what we're trying to do is leverage the 60 years of pioneering work that NASA's done to prepare, figure out the science and the infrastructure around how to prepare people to go to space. At the facility behind me, you can actually see a centrifuge over one shoulder. You can see mock-ups over the other shoulder. This facility will have medical clinics, food preparation facilities, have a neutral buoyancy facility. All of that is key infrastructure for this emerging, commercial market across all those three things. Where are getting calls is from other countries that have a emerging space program. These are countries in Africa or Asia or the Middle East that are saying, hey, we see these leading organizations, Europe, United States, China, Russia, they have human spaceflight programs, but we would like to get into this because we see that as economic opportunity. I think it's no secret that UAE sees space as one of their economic pillars in the future. They're a small Middle Eastern country. They have limited oil resources left. What things can they expand into and be a global player? Well, space is one of them. So how do we support countries like that, where we go in and help them build an industry, provide services, and grow it from there? At the same time, as businesses are waking up to the fact that you can do on-orbit manufacturing and on-orbit research and development, and it's, developing new products and services that you can't build here on Earth, they want to prepare their employees ultimately to go into space and do research and development. Are there other government agencies that would, partner with Orbite versus NASA? Probably. We're NASA adjacent. We're not trying to replicate or replace what they're doing.
Yeah. And SpaceX has talked about the Earth-to-Earth transit, basically replacing long-haul flights, down their roadmap. Um, if that were to happen, how much training experience do you think, you know, individuals would need to take one of these long-haul flights from, you know, Texas to Middle East or somewhere in Europe or Asia? Does that become as simple as just, buying a boarding pass and you just get on? Or do you think there needs to be some kind of training for that point-to-point, Earth-to-Earth travel with these rockets?
That's an interesting question. I think, I mean, talking about point to point in my various businesses over the last 25 years, we've studied that. And I think first it starts with cargo. And then at some point, it could evolve to human spaceflight. I think that the existing operators, suborbital operators, Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, have shown that it takes, people can survive this just fine and even find it enjoyable without a significant amount of training. So it is hypothetically possible that people could just buy a ticket, walk up and go. I think the surprise effect of like, oh, this is what 3Gs feels like. And, if you watch the G meter on reentry of Starship, I think it hit two, maybe a little higher, but it's not super high Gs. People don't need training to go to 3Gs. I've gone on a centrifuge strapped in and went to 3Gs, and it's alarming a little bit, but it doesn't mean you're in danger in any way. So I actually think the idea of point-to-point human travel without a lot of training is possible. For us, I think where the training comes in is more about orbital spaceflight, where you have to live and work in space. How do you take a shower in zero G? How do you use the bathroom in zero G? That is a whole nother step up and skills that you need to learn there that requires a bit of education for humanity really to get off this planet. And I think there is both the desire and the ability with Starship coming online, and I expect that there will be other lower cost space transportation options emerging very soon, either out of the United States or China.
You know, if all of a sudden I just woke up with amnesia and I'm on a rocket that's about to take off, going into space for a couple days and coming back, no idea how I got there or how to do anything really, would I survive? No
The
training at
short answer
all.
is yes. But would you enjoy it? Absolutely not. I think that the hard part about space flight for the vast majority of the population is not the physical, it's the mental, and to a certain extent, the spiritual. Um, the best example I think is William Shatner, where he was on speaking tour, he showed up, he went on a Blue Origin flight, and he survived it just fine, but mentally his mind was blown. And he's talked about this as far as he did not expect to be so overwhelmed by the overview effect, the vastness of space, just the overall experience. And so a lot of what we do is around the mental preparation, the stress management, how to think about life different in a zero gravity world. The physical piece is actually, I don't want to say it's minimal, but it's not super extensive. So that's really where our focus area is. And then on the health and safety, what I don't think most people realize is when you go to space, there are no doctors, there's no hospitals. And so and because it's a zero gravity, some things that we take for granted on this Earth are very bad in space, like a common cold, where the last thing, on Earth, your sinuses get congested, it drains because there's gravity. But if it's not draining, you don't want to suffocate because you just be overcome by mucus. So a lot of what we do is we support that science and research. And if you start talking about, back up historically, you look at NASA, those people are highly screened medically. A lot of them have military backgrounds. These are adventure seekers to begin with. So they don't have a physical problem and they don't have a mental problem. But now you turn to the society. Our goal is to get everybody to space, find a way to say yes to that human space flight where you'd be amazed the number of questions we get, into our website and in our conversations with our clients about, well, I have a pacemaker. Can I go? I have this medical condition. Can I go? And our job is not to say no, or our job is to say yes, but it ultimately gets to, yeah, it depends. We need to do more medical screening. So we're developing a space health program where it's about not only understanding your body better than you normally would going to seeing your doctor, but also about using that data to then identify tools and techniques to make spaceflight better and ultimately understand how the human body works, lives, and works in space. In the history of humanity, 700 people have been to space over 6 decades across all countries. And we started this conversation about saying, well, in the next 5 years, 1,000 people could go a year. So what we're going to learn in a year is so much more than what we learned in 60 years about bioscience and human preparation and the technologies to make that happen. And that's the pointing into the spear that we're pioneering to enable this business.
Yeah, you talk about the mental side of things, and while you were talking, I kind of had an idea of how you can compare it. A lot of people think of being an astronaut, very cool, all fun, beautiful, and they don't understand, the mental anguish that it might have on someone. A comparison I could give to where a lot of people could understand how mentally stressful it could be is, like uh, deep sea welders who are 300 meters down in a living in hyperbolic chambers, and they have to go out. It's dark and cold, and very dangerous environment if you don't have the proper equipment. But you put someone in that environment with everything there, sure they'll survive. But if they're not ready for that, um, you could just imagine it, how terrifying and stressful that could be mentally. Is that sort of the similar effects that would happen in space, or is space, something different?
It's a great analogy because historically, NASA and other space agencies have used the underwater environment to simulate living and working in space, and we actually do that as well. Going back to our space experiences, we take elements of our astronaut training and package it in a fun vacation, and they range from the super adventurous, like going to the Antarctic or going to the deserts of the Middle East to simulate living and working on a foreign planet, to using the underwater environment. And so we operate a program in the Caribbean where we use a small private submersible and take people down on a series of dives. And the submersible is a great earthbound analog to a spacecraft. Like one to one, if you take the Dragon spacecraft and compare it to a small private submersible, the subsystems are nearly identical. The propulsion works different, but the power system is very similar, the navigation system similar. Um, the life support system's very similar. So we do that when you know it's also the human reaction is when you get in a submersible for the first time and you go below the surface, suddenly you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm trapped and I'm in a very foreign environment. This could be dangerous. And so that's really speaks to the mental. Um, so I would say the answer is there actually are a lot of similarities. At the same time, going to space is vastly different. People will point out more people have been to space than been to the bottom of the ocean, which is a true statement. So I see both of these industries evolving in parallel. But yes, absolutely, the underwater environment is a great training environment. We use it, we leverage it, just like NASA and other space agencies do.
Is there an opportunity in the future for a beat to train humanoid robotics?
Yes, is the short answer. Interestingly, we haven't got that question before, but it intuitively makes sense because we've announced partnerships for surface analogs with Astrolab and Interstellar and several other organizations because if we're going to live and work on the moon or on Mars, we need to create an analog environment to do that, a high fidelity environment. Most of those analog environments to date have either been done by NASA for NASA or by groups like the Mars Society for enthusiasts. And one of our initiatives that we're currently working on is create an analog environment for the industry that is supported with real space hardware, not simulated space hardware, so that it is a proving ground for everybody to develop tools and techniques for the exploration of the moon and Mars. And that's whether it's businesses that want to go and try something out, governments who want to come and train their astronauts. And when I say governments, it could be NASA and ESA astronauts, but it could also be astronauts from the Philippines or the Saudi Space Agency, emerging space organizations that don't have the long legacy and history that NASA and ESA do. And then it's great for our clients to get access to that from the B2C standpoint because it's, living and working in a real planetary analog using real space hardware.
Hmm. What do you think the best method for having a permanent presence or semi-permanent presence on the moon and Mars would be in terms of skills and requirements needed to be learned to make those early days of building out the infrastructure on a different planet? What do those people really need to have dialed in and trained for to make that happen?
Well, that's the great adventure we're about to live for the next decade or two. So, I can give you my personal view of the world. I'm not sure
Yeah.
it's going to play out exactly like this, but again, I think you have to look at those three client groups or organization groups and say what motivates them. For governments, we're current in this current space race between China and the United States, but there's other governments out there, India and other Asian governments that want to play a role very specifically in the human presence, the permanent presence on the moon. And those governments are going to look for scientists and individuals that are going to build out and support that infrastructure. Then there's the business elements, the B2B elements of it. With Starship, sorry, we're at a point where space is affordable to everyone, even down to the individual. And so as we well know, there's companies that signed up with Starship to put rovers on the moon to do things like mine helium-3 or develop new resources or do resource extraction. I think historical analogies are really important because you can kind of look back in similar moments in time of expansion. You can look back 400 years ago or 300 years ago, and European countries started coming to the Americas. We're at one of those moments, and haven't been in one of those moments where anybody, any person, or any company can then go and secure 100,000 kilometers on the front side of the moon. What is that worth from a real estate standpoint? And so I think there will be, you can look in the past gold rushes or the wildcatters on the oil expansion, whether it was in Texas or the Dakotas. You're going to get some adventurous personalities that are out there to make a lot of money really fast in a rapid expansion that's driven by a business need. And I'm not going to hypothesize on all of those business needs, but the point is, access has always been a problem, both physical and the price of access. And I think that within the next 5 years, that access is going to be radically improved to the point that things that were not possible and were only science fiction will now be potential reality if someone want to put their resources behind it. And then there's the B2C element of it, which is uh, if you look at SpaceX, when they started Starship, what's the first mission they sold? They actually sold a trip around the moon versus a trip around Earth on Starship. So there's definitely consumer demand for those early adopters to be a pioneer and to go where humanity hasn't gone before. And so I think there will be absolutely people that want to go around the moon and even land on the moon to say they've done it. People have announced the first space hotels that they want to go off and build those. Seems early to me, but that doesn't mean it's not unfeasible in our lifetime.
Yeah, it's a wild future ahead of us. But right now, in the now moment, or be high net worth individuals, it's the entry point, the starting step of who your main customers are. Are there other early revenues that you're chasing potentially with maybe government contracts or testing and experimenting to commercial space tech companies, components or satellites?
Yeah, to be clear, I mean, our go-to-market focus and our revenues are all from all three verticals, B2G, B2B, and
Okay.
B2C. Um, how you market to each of them is different. What you probably see from an outward is the B2C focused because that's where the meta ads come in and everything else from a brand development. But a lot of what we're doing is B2B and B2G, where those emerging space
Oh,
um, we're helping the industry evolve. There's a lot of emerging space agencies that don't have $90 million to fly on VAST, but that doesn't mean they don't have $10 million to fund a program and start the beginnings of a human space flight cadre. And so those are the conversations we're having from a B2G standpoint. And from a B2B standpoint, um, my business partner and co-founder Nicholas Gohm, we met because he has a company. We're both serial entrepreneurs. We both started many companies. He started a company called Space Cargo Unlimited, where they are doing microgravity research and manufacturing in space. He founded and funded his company back in 2014, and to fund his initial work, he had a very novel idea. Growing up in the Bordeaux region, he took a case of Petrus 2000 wine, which is a very exclusive wine, and wanted to age it on the space station for a year and sell it at Christie's. Well, he went to SpaceX, and I had my spaceflight company. He went to SpaceX, and SpaceX says, "We don't do this. Talk to Jason." And so that's how we met. And ultimately, we got his bottles flown. But my point is, a decade later, he has a very successful in-space manufacturing business where there's a lot of corporate clients who are looking to expand and understand what their research opportunities are. And so there's a crossover of how do we train them and build that, call it private business, private contractor astronaut corps, contractors for hire that can go and support these companies to do in-space manufacturing on these emerging platforms that hopefully will be launched here in the coming few years. It will be Starship, but it'll also be commercial LEO destinations. From our standpoint, the biggest access to space and the reduction in price to space is super important. Starship is going to drastically improve that, but at the same time, the industry needs alternative means and large capsules. When I say large capsules, capsules that carry 10 to 20 people versus 4 people, so that we can ferry large amounts of goods and services up to these destinations and back, are going to be important as far as the development of the industry. But what Orbit does today is we make money here on Earth while this industry is evolving and emerging.
Do you think the B2C side of things and swaying the public opinion is even more important than the B2B and B2G? And what I mean by this is, we've seen this in the past where we've had technology and maybe it wasn't implemented just because there didn't seem to be, a large demand of the masses. And then we saw it with electric cars and solar energy, and now we're in a nuclear renaissance. And it's just kind of getting everyone on board and positive about this that really pushes the industry into a hyper accelerated point. So do you think that's what we need, is the public opinion sway to be much more excited about space to really accelerate this timeline?
I think the short answer is the public needs to be educated about what space does to solve problems here on Earth. Out in other parts in Europe specifically, they're like, why are we going to space when we have so many problems here? And the answer is because space is how we're going to solve the problems here. Understanding our planet from looking down from low Earth orbit, where you don't see borders, you just see the fact that we're on this thing called spaceship Earth, this little rock in the middle of nowhere, that we better do a better job of taking care of it. So I think swaying the public opinion about the benefits of space and how it's part of solving our problems here is important. That's a macro. At the same time, you can look at any historical analogy, and you gave some great ones about nuclear and other things, where if nuclear is part of the solution instead of the problem, it sways public opinion. If space is part of the solution versus the problem, it sways public opinion. I think it's also the art of the possible. We had aircraft. Wright brothers flew in what 1904, and it was 1927 when Juan Trippe founded TWA Airlines, and he bought a flying boat and he pioneered the first route across the Caribbean. But within 5 years, he had a whole fleet of clipper ships flying all the way to Asia and back. Um, and so it was just showing the public that it was possible. Now, it was a very expensive journey and it was exclusively for the rich. But if we didn't figure out how to fly the rich in the 1930s, we weren't having 747s in, the 1960s. So we need that progression. And I think we're in those early days where I would say the 2020s was like the 1920s. Space was not even exclusively for the rich. We're in the transition phase where it's going from government led to commercial led. And with Starship, that will be the equivalent of the Clipper ship. And many people will board that Clipper ship and use it to go to low Earth orbit and ultimately to the moon and eventually Mars.
I love that. Well, if there's anyone who's listening to our conversation and you want them to walk away with one big takeaway from all this, what would you want that to be?
The big takeaway, the big surprise to us, and I know a lot of your listeners are investors and other things, is that human spaceflight is actually here and now. We just launched 4 people to the backside of the moon, first time in 54 years. Starship is on the eve of not only being operational, but moving to high flight rates. And the fact that this massive opportunity is staring us right in the face. And I think investors have been so focused on the defense tech that they haven't been able to see the next opportunity behind it. So it's really exactly what your last point, Aidan. It's like that this is here and now, and that we need to sway public opinion and show that this is going to be a massive, massive opportunity.
I love that. Well, Jason, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm very excited about the future after our discussion.
That sounds great. So mine. I hope to see you at F1 in Monaco next week.
Write me. I'll be there. All
Sounds
right.
good.
Take care, Jason.
Thank you. You have a good one.